The red wine hit the white dress like blood on snow, a deliberate act disguised as an accident. In a ballroom filled with chandeliers and champagne, a young black waitress stood frozen, humiliated before the city's elite. Laughter rippled through the crowd, the kind that cuts deeper than any insult. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply looked up, calm, steady, as if she already knew justice would come, just not from where anyone expected. Because that night, the man who saw everything wasn't just another guest. He was her attacker's husband. And what he did next would change everything. Before that night, Jasmine Washington's life was a delicate balance between ambition and survival. By day, she was an MBA student at Harvard, sharp, disciplined, and determined to build a future her mother had only dreamed of. By night, she worked endless shifts, trading textbooks for trays, hoping every dollar earned would push her family one step closer to stability. She wasn't supposed to be at the Boston Annual Charity Gala. It was meant to be just another catering job, a few hours of polite smiles and quiet service beneath glittering chandeliers. The kind of event where the wealthy talk about generosity while treating the staff as invisible. But Jasmine wasn't invisible. Beneath her calm eyes lived a lifetime of quiet strength, shaped by years of carrying burdens far heavier than a silver tray. Every yes, ma'am, and every polite nod hid the story of a young woman who had learned that dignity was her greatest armor. That evening, the ballroom sparkled with luxury. Austrian crystals shimmered from the ceiling, violins whispered soft melodies, and designer gowns floated like illusions of grace. Among them stood Victoria Hartwell, the kind of woman who believed her wealth granted her superiority. To her, the world was neatly divided between those who served and those who were served. And when their paths crossed, the collision was inevitable. Because beneath all the charm and champagne, something darker stirred, a fragile ego, a lifetime of prejudice, and a moment that would expose the ugly truth hiding behind polished smiles. No one there could have imagined that this ordinary waitress, calm and composed in her uniform, was about to change not just her own fate, but the reputation of one of Boston's most powerful families. The gala moved like a carefully choreographed performance, laughter blending with the orchestra's melody, champagne glasses chiming under the glow of golden light. For Jasmine, it was just another night to keep her head down, stay professional, and finish her shift unnoticed. But fate doesn't always respect quiet intentions. It began with a simple accident, or at least, that's how it looked. As Jasmine carried a tray of hors d'oeuvres past a table draped in silk and status, Victoria Hartwell extended her hand a little too quickly, her diamond ring snagging Jasmine's sleeve. The tray wobbled, the glasses fell, and time seemed to slow. A splash of red wine arced through the air before landing squarely on Victoria's gown, crimson spreading across ivory silk like a wound. The music didn't stop, but the room did. Eyes turned. Whispers rose like a chill wind. Victoria froze for a heartbeat, then slowly looked down at her stained dress. Her lips curved, not with shock, but with something colder, disgust. It wasn't the accident that enraged her. It was who had caused it. Without a word, she snatched Jasmine's serving cloth, pressed it against her gown, and then, in a sharp, deliberate motion, tore it down Jasmine's uniform. The sound of ripping fabric echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Gasps followed. Some covered their mouths, others looked away, pretending not to see. Humiliation burned through Jasmine's chest, but she didn't move. Her instincts screamed to apologize, to escape, yet she stood still, heart pounding, trying to hold on to the one thing she could still control, her composure. Victoria tilted her chin, eyes glinting with cruel satisfaction. "Maybe next time," she said coolly, "they'll hire someone who knows her place." The words weren't shouted, but they carried, slicing through the air, landing heavier than the torn fabric on the floor. No one defended Jasmine. Not one person. The conductor motioned for the music to resume, and the crowd obeyed, pretending the scene hadn't happened, a collective silence far louder than any insult. Jasmine gathered what was left of her dignity, retreating toward the kitchen, each step echoing with a question that had haunted her all her life. Why is kindness never enough? But as she crossed the marble floor, a presence followed her gaze, calm, assessing, and silent. Daniel Hartwell, Victoria's husband, had witnessed every moment. From his table at the far end of the room, his expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes did, a flicker of disbelief, then something deeper. He knew the woman before him wasn't just a waitress. He knew that face, not from this world of glitter and gossip, but from somewhere that once mattered more. Jasmine disappeared through the kitchen doors, unaware that her life had already taken a turn no apology could undo. The night that began as humiliation was about to become revelation. Because while Victoria believed she had reminded a young black woman of her place, she had no idea that the man she was married to was about to remind her of hers. The kitchen was silent, the kind of silence that follows after deep humiliation. Jasmine stood alone beside the sink, hands trembling, the torn fabric clinging to her like a scar. The faint sound of laughter drifted in from the ballroom, muffled by the heavy doors, laughter at her expense. But before she could gather herself to leave, the doors opened. In walked Daniel Hartwell, immaculate in his tuxedo, but with eyes that held neither pity nor arrogance. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her, really looked, as if searching for something beyond the uniform, beyond the pain. And then, quietly, he nodded, as if confirming what his heart already knew. Moments later, he stepped back into the glittering chaos of the ballroom. The music faltered when he raised his hand. Conversations died. Even Victoria froze, her painted smile fading as she noticed the rigid calm in his expression. Daniel's voice carried through the hall, steady but sharp. He spoke of dignity, respect, and the kind of class that money could never buy. Every word struck the crowd like a wave, peeling away their comfort, forcing them to face what they had just ignored. And then he said it. He turned to Victoria, the woman who had torn another's dress to feel superior, and said, "You didn't just humiliate a waitress tonight. You humiliated your own sister-in-law." Gasps rippled through the room. Wine glasses froze midair. Jasmine stepped out from the kitchen, her torn uniform replaced with quiet poise and unshaken grace. The truth hit harder than any insult. Daniel's brother had married Jasmine years ago, before tragedy struck, making her not just the help, but family. Victoria's face drained of color. The crowd stared, the same people who had looked away now unable to do so. For the first time that night, Jasmine didn't need to say a word. Her presence alone was enough to silence a room built on appearances. And as Victoria's perfect world began to crumble beneath her own arrogance, one thought echoed louder than the applause that followed. Justice doesn't always arrive in anger. Sometimes it walks in wearing a suit. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. In that grand ballroom, filled with people who once looked through her, Jasmine Washington stood tall, not as a waitress, not as a victim, but as a woman who had finally been seen. The same crowd that had ignored her humiliation now whispered her name with a mixture of guilt and awe. Victoria's empire of elegance shattered in an instant. Sponsors withdrew from her charities, partners distanced themselves, and the same society that once adored her turned its back. But for Jasmine, justice wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration. She didn't seek to ruin Victoria, she simply allowed the truth to speak louder than the lie. Weeks later, the story spread far beyond the ballroom. News outlets called it, "The night Grace won over prejudice." Messages poured in from people who had faced similar humiliation, waiters, nurses, teachers, and dreamers who knew what it felt like to be treated as less. Jasmine's quiet strength became a symbol of dignity, a reminder that grace under fire is its own form of power. But beneath all the headlines, the real impact was quieter, found in the uncomfortable questions people began to ask themselves. How many times had they stayed silent when someone was degraded? How often had they mistaken privilege for worth? Racism doesn't always announce itself with slurs or violence. Sometimes it hides in polite laughter, in looks that diminish, in the comfort of those who choose to look away. That night, Jasmine didn't just change her own story, she forced everyone who watched to question theirs. Because real change doesn't begin when the world applauds your courage. It begins the moment someone decides silence is no longer an option. So ask yourself, when you see injustice dressed in elegance, will you stay quiet? Or will you be the voice that finally breaks the silence?